This is a review of using Abranet Sanding Mesh for sanding on the lathe. All that and more coming up. When I first got my lathe, all I had was big sheets of sandpaper, so I cut them down into some small strips and used them to sand my first project, which was an ice cream scoop handle made out of mahogany. Someone commented on my YouTube channel that I should try the sanding strips that they sell for sanding on lathes. I was in Rockler one day and they had these on sale for half price, so I picked up a set. From what I've seen, most of these sets are like this one from Rockler. They go from 150 grit up to 600. I used the sanding strips on several projects, including this shoehorn handle that I made. I found these sanding strips to be very useful when sanding on the lathe. As with the sandpaper, I noticed that the coarser grits wore out much faster than the finer grits, so I was afraid I would run out of the coarser grits long before I ran out of the finer grits. This is one of 12 ice cream scoop handles that I batched out one year for Christmas presents. I happened to catch a few videos with people sanding on the lathe using Abranet Mesh. I found this variety pack on Amazon and decided to give it a try. This package starts out at 80 grit and goes all the way up to 600. Coming up, I'll show some other sanding mesh options towards the end of the video. This is how I laid out the Abranet Mesh on the table in front of my lathe. On the left, I laid out the 80 and 100 grit in case I needed them for some deep scratches in my turnings. On the right-hand side, I put my 120 through 600 grit stack in the right order. As we go through this next section, you can see how this worked out. If I noticed that a turning had deep scratches in it left by my tools, I used the 80 grit to take those out, and then moved up to 100 grit. Sometimes I just started with the 100 grit because the scratches weren't quite as deep as they were when I needed the 80 grit. After I finished using the 80 or 100 grit, I made sure that I put them over on my left side, then moved over to my right and started with 120 grit. Most of the time, I started with my 120 and worked up from there. The next step is 120 up to 150. Next is 180. By now, you may be wondering what's the advantage of the mesh. I found, as others have found, that it doesn't clog up nearly as badly as sandpaper does. Followed by 220. Next, it moves from 220 up to 320. I was able to use the Abranet Mesh pads for this whole batch of 15 pizza cutter handles and some additional things that I've used it for since. The next grit is 400. I'm finding that the coarser grits are lasting just as long as the finer grits with this sanding mesh. And finally, 600. I found that the sanding results from the mesh were very similar to their counterparts in sandpaper, if not smoother. Since I was batching out 15 pizza cutter handles, I restacked everything and got set for the next one. Lexi would like to remind you to subscribe to our channel. And then switched over to my micro mesh sanding pads. Maybe they'll be the subject of a future video. I also used the Abranet Mesh when I sanded this pedestal that I was putting on top of a trophy. I found it worked very well for this project. I'm sure it would work well for bowls, but I know there's other things that people use to sand bowls. Obviously, when they say Abranet Mesh is dust-free sanding, they certainly don't mean it doesn't create dust. What it means is that the sanding dust does not clog up the mesh like it does sandpaper. For those of you who would prefer sanding strips, I did find strips of Woodturner's Mesh from Woodcraft under their Wood River brand. These strips start at 180 grit and go up to 600 grit. At $39.98 US, this is a very expensive alternative. Perhaps this Turner's Mesh made by Fulton at $19.99 per package would be a better choice. It also comes in grits from 180 to 600. For those of you that do flat work like I do, Abranet Mesh does also come in discs, both 5 and 6-inch sizes. I found this variety pack on Amazon, and it looks like it would be something to try. Another thing that I noticed is that Mirka Abranet Sanding Mesh comes in 2 3/4 inch by 10-foot rolls. For people who really like this would be probably the most economical way to buy it. I've really found that this Abranet Mesh has worked very well when sanding on the lathe. I've even used it for some of my flat work. I'm not sure if it will replace sandpaper in the future for me, but I'm going to give it a good try. I know some of those options that I gave you for the sanding mesh and strips look like they're promising. I may even try the box of Fulton someday if I find that these are too big and they get in the way. But so far, I've been very happy with them. If you like this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up down below. Please subscribe to our channel. I thank you for doing that. Ring that notification bell so you know when videos are coming from our channel. And thank you all very much for watching.
Woo!